We'll continue with economics, A level, chapter 5, costs. But before we go deeply into cost simply means the amount being spent to ensure that a product is made available. That is what cost is. But before we go into in depth, there's what we call the short run cost and the long run cost. So we need to talk about the short run and the long run cost. So we're going to start with the short run. What's the difference between the short run and the long run? We call it the short run because there's always going to be one factor input that is fixed in the short run. And with the long run, all factor inputs are variables. That means you can use them for whatever you want to use them for. So that's the difference between a short run and a long run. In the short run, a factor will be fixed. But in the long run, all factors become variable. So here I wrote the short run and the long run. In the short run, producers have the problem that at least one of their factor inputs is fixed in supply. This simply implies that in the short run, there's constraint on how much products can be produced by a firm. In the short run, there's a problem. And the problem is that there's constraint on what we can produce. Why? Because all the factor inputs we used, either two of them will be what? Fixed. That means we cannot change it. Maybe land, equipment, machinery, we cannot change them in the short run. Yes, maybe you could employ more workers, yes. Maybe you could order for more raw materials, yes. But equipment, machines, land are not things you can change in the short run. So that means there's always going to be what? Constraint on how much we can produce in the short run. Do you understand the short run here?
Yes,
great. Then in the long run, why do we call it the long run? We call it the long run because all factor becomes variable. So here I wrote, in the long run, all factors inputs are variable. This simply means that a producer can vary on the amount of land, labor, and capital it can use at any point in time. There's no constraint on how much can be produced by a firm. So in the long run, there's no constraint on how much you can produce as a firm. Why? Because all your factor inputs, land, labor, and capital are all variables, which means you can use them for whatever you want to use them for. Now, how do we know when is the short run and how do we know when is the short run? There's no time frame to know if it is a short run or the long run. So short run is simply the time it takes you to be able to operate on a larger scale. Get it here? Don't think the short run means 2 days, 3 days, 1 month in a year, 12 months in 6 years. No. Short run ends whenever you are able to switch to start producing on a larger scale. Because as soon as you start producing on a larger scale, your average variable cost starts reducing. It means you are dealing with variables. And the only time you can deal with variables are when in the long run, where all factors are inputs, or when all factors are variables. That is when the long run starts. Do you get the point I'm making here? Short run does not mean a day in 7 days. It does not mean 1 week in 4 months, in 7 days in 1 month. No, it is not the time frame. It is not just the period of time. It is the time frame that it takes you to switch or to start producing on a larger scale. That is when your short run ends. So it is still in the short run. Even if it is 10 years, you are still operating on a smaller scale. Because you are operating on a smaller scale because there's constraints in your factor inputs. Do you get the point I'm making here? Without constraints, it means you can operate on a larger scale. So whenever it takes you to operate on a smaller scale, it's always going to be in the short run. In the long run, you can operate on a larger scale. That's why they said, in summary, there's no definite time which the short run laps. There's no time it laps. The short run is the time it takes to start operating on a large scale. So if it's going to take you 4 months to start operating on a larger scale. So within those 4 months, you are still what? In the short run. So the time it takes you to operate on a larger scale that will allow you to exploit economies of scale is what we call the short run. Any question about the short run?
No, sir.
So that's the difference between the short run and the long run. Clear? So we go to the short run diminishing returns now. Are you there? Okay. For the short run diminishing return, it said in the short run, at least one factor must be fixed. Assumption that a firm uses only 2 factors of production, capital and labor. If more workers are employed, initially they will reach the best level of production, which is the optimum level, which is the most efficient. Eventually, if more workers are employed, the total output will fall. This is because capacity available, which is fixed, is not big enough for the increasing size of workers. This is called law of diminishing returns or the law of diminishing marginal productivity. So the point about diminishing returns in the short run is this. In the short run, we said in the short run, a factor is fixed. We said in the short run, a factor is fixed. So because a factor is fixed in the short run, whatever we do, whatever we operate on, there's always going to be constraints. So these constraints brings about diminishing marginal utility, marginal productivity. So it is this. There's diminishing returns. Note, in the short run, we have diminishing returns. In the long run, we have return to scale. Get the difference between the short run and the long run. In the short run, we have what? Diminishing returns. In the long run, we have return to scale. So what are the difference between these two things? In the short run, why do we have diminishing returns in the short run? We have diminishing returns in the short run because there's always going to be a fixed factor input. So let's assume we have this room, which is capital, it is fixed. 4 workers might be able to work in this room. 4 workers might be able to do their job in this room. Then we employ more workers. They continue to give us more until it reaches the optimum level. As soon as we employ like 10, 11, 12 workers in here, they will start clashing on each other. There's no more space for them. And we cannot expand the space capacity in the short run. So that means initially they start increasing their output, but it will reach the optimum level. And if it exceeds the optimum level, it starts diminishing. So what goes up starts coming down. That is diminishing return. Do you understand what diminishing returns is here?
Mm-hmm.
It is always going to be in the short run because in the short run, there's constraints on factor inputs like land or capital or equipment. We continue to increase certain input and we left the other ones as constant. It becomes a strain on those ones that are constant. So here I said, I said, this is because the capacity available is fixed, isn't big enough for the increasing size of workers. This is called the law of diminishing returns or the law of diminishing marginal productivity. So what is the law of diminishing returns I wrote? The law of diminishing returns is an economic principle stating that in production process, as one input is increased while others are held constant, the marginal product of that input will eventually decrease. So the point is, not only the marginal product, the average product, the total product will start diminishing because you continue to use the same equipment, you continue to use the same machinery, the same land, and they continue to be constant, and you continue to increase the number of other variables. So it becomes a strain on those equipment, just like when you have a car and you have 10 people driving the same car. The car will diminish. Do you understand? So that strain on that equipment that is constant is what we call diminishing returns. Do you understand diminishing returns there? Any question about diminishing returns?
No, sir.
So the law of diminishing return can be explained further using the concepts of total product, average product, and marginal product. So if we want to talk about the law of diminishing return, it is better we talk about it based on what is being produced, our output. And when we talk about our output, we're talking about total product, the average product, and the marginal product. Are you with me?
Yes.
So we start with the total product. What is total product? Total product is the quantity of output produced by a given number of inputs over a period of time. The total number of output produced by a given number of inputs. That gives us our total product. I think total product is clear. Great. Then we have the average product. The average product is what? The total output per unit of input. Total output per unit of input. So it is TP divided by output. Do you understand average product here?
Yeah.
Then for marginal product implies to the amount of output produced as extra input is used. The amount of output produced as extra unit of input is used. That is our marginal product. Do you understand the difference here?
Yes.
For total product, we're talking about the total quantity produced with a given level of input. For my average product, it is the total of output per unit of input. And for marginal product, it is what? The total amount of output produced with a given level of extra unit of input. I think it's clear. Any question about that? Any question, please?
No.
So that takes us to the explanation of the table. So we have table 1. Are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I will the analysis of diminishing returns with table 1. So with table 1, capital is fixed at 10. Based on the table, capital is fixed at 10. Then we have zero labor. If you have zero labor, that means no worker is being employed. If no worker is employed, the total product will be 0, the average product will be 0, the marginal product will be what? 0, because no workers are being employed. Now, we start. The same unit of capital is still at 10 because the capital is fixed. Now we employ one worker. Employing one worker means that we have 20 units of output. And if we have 20 units of output, our average product would be 20 and the marginal product will be 20 because it's just one worker. As soon as the number of workers increases to 2, the total product becomes 54. Then the marginal product will be total product 2 minus total product 1, which is marginal product, which is MP 34. Do you get the point here? MP is TP2 minus TP1, or change in total product divided by change in output. Do you get the point here, please?
Yes, sir.
So with 2 workers employed, 34 extra units were produced. Now, the same constraint, the same capital is still 10, which is fixed. 3 workers are employed. The marginal product continues to rise until the 5th. So look at our marginal product. That is where, we're talking about law of diminishing marginal productivity. So we need to figure out where our marginal productivity starts diminishing. And the marginal productivity is at the 5th number of workers employed. So when the 5th worker was employed, the marginal productivity reduced from 51 to 46. Do you get it?
Yes.
So the law of diminishing returns starts setting in when the 5th worker was employed. So that is what the law of diminishing returns is. So you see, it continues to fall and fall and fall. That is what the law of diminishing return is about. Because you continue to use the same equipment, 10 machines, and you continue to increase the numbers of workers until 8. And it gives us a negative. Do you understand what the law of diminishing return is now? As more workers are employed, the number of output continues to rise over time. But it's going to get to the optimum level, which you cannot exceed. Because when you exceed the optimum level, it will start diminishing. That is what we call the law of diminishing returns or the law of diminishing marginal productivity. Any question about that?
No.
So this implies that, so this can be graphically represented as this. This implies that the total product, average product, and marginal product initially rise before they start falling. So when we talk about the law of diminishing returns, at the initial stage, your marginal product, your total product, your average product, and your marginal product will start increasing until the optimum level. And after the optimum level, the 3 of them will start what? Falling. I think it's clear. So that's it here. You see, initially, the total product rises, then start falling. The average product starts rising, then start falling. The marginal product rises, then start falling. So all these will bring about law of diminishing marginal utility. Any question about that?
No, sir.
So that takes us to returns to scale. Are you there?
Yes.
So for returns to scale, initially I told you that we have diminishing returns because we are working in the short run. But in the long run, where we have ability to use all factor inputs, there are 3 possibilities. Either we have increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale, or decreasing returns to scale, not diminishing. In the short run, because we have a fixed factor input, we're going to have the diminishing returns. But in the long run, where we have the ability to use all factor inputs, land, labor, and capital, we can use them at our will. We're not going to have diminishing returns. We're going to have returns to scale. So there are 3 possibilities to returns to scale. We have increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale, decreasing returns to scale. So let's look at each one at a time. So what does returns to scale simply mean? I wrote, this applies to how a firm's output changes when all inputs are increased or decreased proportionally in the long run. So how output changes over time in the long run. That is what we call returns to scale. Any question about returns to scale?
No.
So now, what are the 3 possibilities in the long run? The first one is increasing returns to scale. Why do we call it increasing returns to scale? We call it increasing returns to scale because the number of input has increased more than the number of input increased, but the output increased in more proportional than the input. That means the more we increase our inputs, but it gives us more than proportionate output. That is increasing returns to scale. So here I wrote, this occurs if an equal percentage increase in inputs to production brings about a more than proportionate increase in output. For example, if a firm increases its land, labor, and capital inputs by 200%, but the result brings about 300% in terms of output, that is what we call increasing returns to scale. You increase your inputs by 200%, and your output gives a result of 300%. That is increasing returns to scale. Do you understand increasing returns to scale? Then we have the constant returns to scale. This occurs if an equal percentage increase in inputs to production brings about the same percentage increase in output. So you increase your inputs by 100%, a firm increases its input by 100%, and the output also increases by 100%. That is a constant returns to scale. For increasing returns to scale, it simply means our output increases more than proportional of the input increase. That is increasing returns to scale. For a constant returns to scale, it means the input increases at the same rate as the output. Then we have what we call the decreasing returns to scale. Why do we call it decreasing returns to scale? We call it decreasing returns to scale because it occurs, I said this occurs if an equal percentage increase in inputs to production leads to a less than proportionate increase in output. So which simply means there's decreasing returns to scale if a firm increases its input by 100%, but its output increases by less than 100%. You increase your input by 100%, but your output increases less than 100%. That is what we call decreasing returns to scale, not diminishing. Decreasing returns to scale. So the difference between the short run and the long run is that in the short run, we have the law of diminishing returns. But in the long run, we have what we call the returns to scale.
To returns to scale.
And the return to scale could be increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale,
decreasing
returns to scale. So that ends return or diminishing returns, the long run and the short run. Any question about that?
No.
Good. So in the next class, we'll talk about cost itself.